Build a polished wardrobe that shows you stay you wherever you go with Mack Weldon. Use code MAC25 for 25% off your first order of $125 or more at MackWeldon.com.
Remember those endless summer days that felt like they just last forever? Sun rays kiss your skin. Grass tickles your toes as you bite into the creamy popsicle melting in your hand. Pure, unbothered bliss. Capture more sun-drenched memories with the Orange Vanilla Dream Hydration Multiplier from Liquid IV. This nostalgic vanilla flavor with notes of candied orange can help keep you hydrated while savoring your favorite golden hour moments. No matter how hot your summer gets, just one stick of Liquid IV and 16 ounces of water hydrates you better than water alone. It's 3 times the electrolytes of the leading sports drink, with 8 vitamins and nutrients for refreshing on-the-go hydration. Live your summer dream with Liquid IV. Tear, pour, live more. Go to liquidiv.com and get 20% off your first order with code INDULGE20 at checkout. That's code INDULGE20 at liquidiv.com.
Hey, warmer from you low. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the Veason Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by one of our good friends. That would be Mr. Tristan Freeman. He does amazing work over at Bustin' Brackets, taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Covers pretty much all 364 teams. We're going to be chatting with him about what we can expect out there in the ACC. Pittsburgh actually had some international, shall we say, pickups over the last few weeks, so could they be a team that is sort of in the middle of the ACC that is able to rise up? Because there's probably going to be a pretty big giant middle. Can some of those bottom teams be able to help out the upper teams? Because we have noticed over the last few seasons with the ACC that the bottom teams have been so bad that they have really dragged down the conference. Could we see a little bit of a rise up with some of these teams? Is there a team that could maybe disrupt the apple cart with regards to some of your top teams like Louisville, Virginia, North Carolina, Duke? Is there a team that could perhaps be able to challenge them? So we're going to talk about that. I know he's out there in the lovely city of Pittsburgh, so we'll talk a little Robert Morris as well, and just a few teams that he's feeling bullish/bearish on. So nice wide-ranging 2-part conversation here with our good friend Tristan. Used to be where I was giving you guys the news and notes of college basketball from like the last 24, 48 hours. We just don't have a lot of player movement happening right now. We've seen a few international men of mystery move around, like what we've seen with Pittsburgh, which is why we've got Tristan on the show today to be able to shed a little bit of light on that, but not having as much of that moving forward. So a lot of 2-part conversations and lots of conference previews moving forward on this podcast. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Heaps, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways we offer those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, RCM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by Edge Boost. Over at Edge Boost, they're making sure that bettors are able to have access to the funds that they so desire anywhere at any time. 100% of gambling transactions, they do get approved when you go to edgeboost.bet. Put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That gets you a dollar for dollar match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat with our good friend in Tristan. He does such an amazing job all 12 months of the year taking a look at this great sport of college basketball. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at HoopsNut351. And in addition to his great work over at Bustin' Brackets, he also does some great work over at the Field of 68, Sleepers Media, and so much more. And Tristan, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Greg. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you, Tristan. And Tristan, it's interesting times out there in the ACC, as typically in mid-July things really slow down, but hopefully I'm saying this name correct. Roman Sulepa, he's going to be going on over to Pittsburgh, should be able to add a little bit of size and a little bit of versatility for this Pittsburgh roster. And how big was it that Pittsburgh was able to go the international route and add after, let's call it what it is, Pittsburgh lost a lot in that backcourt during the offseason, and it felt like the guys that they were bringing in the transfer portal, it was going to be a little bit of a step down before they brought in Mr. Roman.
Yeah, I mean, considering it's July, there's really next to nothing in the transfer portal, and the international route has been the new pipeline for a lot of teams. Another ACC team who officially got the good news from that is Virginia getting their own full forward in Tyus DeRitter. So Pittsburgh getting arguably Australia's top prospect in the 2025 class in Sapuya is big. And, front court play was a big issue for them at times for Pitt, and having, a rebuilt front court with Iowa State transfer Deshaun Jackson. You bring back Corin, you bring back Conte, and now you have someone like Sapuya, who can be a very, physical front court player in his own right at the 4 spot. Now rebounding, which Pittsburgh was one of the worst teams in the ACC at that shouldn't be as much of an issue coming the next season.
Nope, it should not be as much of an issue. And for Pittsburgh, I think that it's big for them because we've talked about this quite a bit. It feels like the top teams are the top teams in the ACC. I think that Duke, North Carolina, very much solidified up there along with Louisville, and I'm thinking Virginia is going to be good this year. NC State should probably be able to make out that top 5, but after really that top 5, if you really want to go SMU, I probably won't go that far, but I think that they're going to be solid as well. But sort of that, we're going to call it 6 through 11, 12 range. It feels like it's very, very open. And something like this for Pittsburgh could be the difference between being at the bottom of that and being at the top of that.
Yeah, I mean, look, the front court last year was a strength with Jalen Lowe and Ish Leggett. Both of them were gone, along with Damian Dunn. And, they don't have a lot of proven scorers in the projected backcourt with, Oregon State transfer DeMarco Minor and Iowa State transfer Idrisidis not being, proven elite scorers, at least at the ACC level. So you're going to need to win other areas. And I think Pittsburgh right now does have a front court that can compete with the rest of the teams in the ACC. The backcourt, however, is going to be the question mark. But, if you can play a physical, first and 60 type of game and you dominate the board so the misses aren't as huge, then that could be how Pitt ultimately wins games next season. And it could be good enough to keep them in the top half of the ACC.
Yep, absolutely. As Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I do think that sort of those teams 3 through 5, 3 through 6 are very interesting in the ACC as well, because I know that there are varying opinions about NC State with so many transfers, but we all know that Will Wade is always going to be able to get the job done. I think that Louisville in year number 2 under Pat Kelsey is intriguing, but I just really like this Virginia team with Ryan Odom, ironically enough, going to the place where he knocked off Virginia in a 1-16 matchup many, many years ago. But I just look at the guys that they brought in. I take a look at the overall balance that Ryan Odom has, and additionally the results that Ryan Odom has gotten over at Utah State, obviously UMBC, VCU, you go down the list, and that's a guy that I just don't want to doubt, even though he's jumping up a pretty big level with regards to this coaching job.
And look, he's been successful at every place he's been. That's a welcoming sign. And outside of the very top tier of Duke, Louisville, UNC, it's not as if Virginia's roster in Odom's first year is going to be intimidated by anyone else. And he's done a great job with guards throughout his years, including at Utah State and UMBC. And you have mid-major stars such as Sam Lewis and Malik Thomas, Ja'Cory White coming in, and Down Hall, who's a proven power conference point guard as well. They're going to have the pieces to be good. They're going to have a really good offense. So it's going to come down to the play the front court. They have the international newcomers. We have the former 5-star in Ghana Yenzo, the Kansas State transfer. We'll see what they can do. As long as the front court can hold their own, I don't see why Virginia can't be a contender for a top 4 or 5 spot in the ACC.
Yep, we are in total agreement there, as we do have Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Bustin' Brackets, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And we've talked about this quite a bit, the divide between the have and the have-nots in the ACC. But is there one of these teams in the ACC that a lot of people think might be in the bottom half of the conference? Obviously, like a Stanford, Georgia Tech, Boston College, those are obviously teams that we're looking at as being teams that are going to be dregs once again in this conference. But is there one or two of these teams that you feel like have a little bit of upside and might be able to elevate and challenge a little bit more for like a top 6, top 7 spot?
Well, I think one with the expectations of fighting for a top 6 spot will be Notre Dame. They've returned one of the better backcourts in the country, and Marcus Burton, Brayton Shrewsbury, who had the 5-star, guard wing prospect Jalen Harrelson coming in. The big issue for them has been the front court. And, did they add Carson Tout, the transfer from, I think, Northern Arizona, who's a, really good rebounder. You have several other freshman bigs. They just need guys that can, be actual ACC players. They haven't had that the last couple of years, and that's ultimately shown. No matter how much, the guards can score, they just get beaten up too much inside. And, I think that's still going to be a question because they don't really have much proven guys. And the only one who returned who got substantial minutes arguably was Kevin Njai. So if front court can play well, they can absolutely be a top 6 team. And, this is the big year for Coach Shrewsbury because he had a lot of, fanfare after taking Penn State to the tournament with his style of, shooting threes, but they haven't had the results so far in his tenure. This is the year where it feels like there's no excuses for why they can't take the leap into at least the top half of the league and get back to being a contender for the postseason.
Yep, I'm right there with you. I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a put up or shut up year for him, and I do think that team is going to be of intrigue. And I am for Cal. They're another team I take a look at that is a little bit of a question mark for me because for Cal, they certainly had not a lot to be able to build around the last few seasons, and I really like the hire of Mark Madsen. Got them to 14 wins last year, but it feels like it's been a little bit of a slower build than I was anticipating for them. How do you view this Cal team? One where it just feels like they haven't been able to keep any of their guys, and it's been sort of a rebuild every single year that Mark Madsen has been at Cal, dating back to when they were in the Pac-12.
Yeah, I think, Cal's admission standards isn't necessarily, to the level of a Stanford or the Ivy Leagues where, they can't really get anyone from the portal, but it still can be a bit restrictive. They get good players. Last year, you had Andrej Stojakovic and you had, the freshman Jeremiah Wilkinson, but you didn't really have much else. And you need to have, in the ACC, you still have to have at least 6 or 7 legit ACC players if you want to contend. And they only had arguably 3 or 4. That's going to be the issue for them when they're trying to get out the bottom. And, this upcoming roster, it's a lot of high ceiling guys, but also low floors. You bring in John Camden, who didn't do well in the ACC when he was at Virginia Tech, played better at Delaware, but now he comes back up. Chris Bell's the type of guy who can score 20 points in a game, and there are also going to be times where he goes 2 of 10 and pretty much disappears. So they have pieces who can play well, but don't know how good they're going to be, especially when they're not playing at Cal and have to travel out east for the road games.
Yep, those road games are going to be very much a bear, and I think this is a piece of the puzzle that's worth talking about. These teams that were out there on the West Coast that were a part of the old Pac-12, going into the Big Ten, going into the Big 12, how much of a struggle they had as opposed to the East Coast teams going from east to west when the West Coast teams had to go from west to east so much more. How much of a deficit is that to these Pacific time zone teams that are now in the power conferences? We'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit about the Horizon League. We'll talk about just a few teams in general that Tristan is bullish on, and we'll do so on the flip side right here on Let's Go Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the BC Family Podcast.
Dreaming of blissful summer days and creamy popsicles? Capture sun-drenched memories with the Orange Vanilla Dream Hydration Multiplier from Liquid IV. Just 1 stick and 16 ounces of water can help hydrate you better than water alone. Live your summer dream with Liquid IV. Tear, pour, live more. Go to liquidiv.com and get 20% off your first order with code INDULGE20 at checkout.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Great to be rejoined by our good friend Tristan Freeman. He does such amazing work over at Boston Brackets, looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Follow him on Twitter/X at HoopsNut351. He does also great work over at the Field of 68 and Sleepers Media. And we left off talking about how much more difficult the travel was for these West Coast teams in the power conferences like Cal and Stanford, obviously going from the Pac-12 on over to the ACC. USC, UCLA, going from the Pac-12 on over to the Big Ten. How much more difficult the travel was for them rather than these other teams? And do you think that might iron out a little bit more in year number 2 with these teams being a little bit more used to it? Because I just still take a look at things, and with a West Coast team, they're going to be having to make East Coast road trips like 5 to 6 times a year. Meanwhile, a team like Purdue out there in the Big Ten, I think that they only have to go out there to the West Coast once, and I do think that it's been disproportionately hurting these West Coast teams rather than the East Coast teams.
We had a look at that when, the Big Ten and the Big 12 brought in those teams. The travel wasn't necessarily as large, especially for the Big 12 teams. That's why you saw Arizona do well in year 1. But we also saw Washington struggle completely when they moved over. Oregon was solid. But the California schools, they had, more downs than ups. And travel is going to be a big issue, not just, for the day by day, wear and tear over the season, but it's also going to be, an issue when it comes to recruitment, because how are you going to, convince guys to go through this travel if you're not a tournament team? You can do this if you're Arizona, if you're Oregon, if you're UCLA, and have them go all the way across the country. But it's going to be a lot harder to pull to do it if you're Cal and Stanford.
Yep, no question about it. As Tristan Freeman, who does such great work over at Boston Brackets, is joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And Tristan, I know you're obviously doing a great job with the ACC, but you're taking a look at a little bit of everything. I know that you're doing some conference previews. I know that you're scoping out things all across the country, and I know that you've been taking a look at things like the FIBA World Cup teams that we were seeing over the last few weeks as well. So I know you're involved in a little bit of everything. And just as you've been doing your off-season research, has there been a team or two that has been really popping for you and you're just feeling much, much better about them now than you did towards the beginning part of the offseason?
Yeah, I mentioned Big Ten, and I think, Ohio State's going to be a team whose roster is going to almost become too good to fail. You bring back Bruce Thornton. Devin Royal was one of the better wings in the country last year, but really flew under the radar. And I think the front court got better. Obviously, there's going to be some questions on whether or not Brandon Noel can defend at the Big Ten level, but he's definitely going to be able to score. Transfer from White State, who can give you 20 in any given time. I just think, also concerned the fact that John Mobley could be one of the better sophomores in the country. There's just a ton of talent Ohio State has, and people don't really have them as a top 25 team. Obviously, the young coach Diebler, people aren't necessarily 100% sure on, considering that he got his, job after a solid run as interim coach. But Ohio State has top 10, 15 kind of talent throughout the roster when healthy. As long as the coaching isn't the issue, I don't see why they can't compete for a top 4 or 5 spot in the Big Ten. If that doesn't happen, they finish more middle pack, then you can probably point the fingers at the coaching issue.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that Big Ten is going to be so intriguing this season, because I take a look at really a big two out there in the Big Ten with regards to Purdue and Michigan. Michigan bringing in Yaxel Lendeborg and Purdue bringing back darn near everyone along with Oscar Clough. I think that those are going to be dominant teams, but I feel like there might be a big giant logjam in the middle once again in the Big Ten. And just like we were talking about with Pittsburgh, them bringing in their international man of mystery, them that being perhaps a 3 to 4 spot swing with regards to where they might be when it's all said and done, the ACC. I feel the exact same way about the Big Ten, where a few bounces one way or another could take a team from being like 10th in the standings to like 5th.
Yeah, and you mentioned, the recent European and international events. I mean, Heinz Staubach, the 6'10" freshman forward from Germany, had a huge under 19 tournament. I think he had like 18 and 13 against Team USA alone. He's going to come in, and right now he's going to be competing with the ASUN Player of the Year, Jacob Vasenovich, for minutes at the 4 or 5 spot. But he's someone that, if he's an impact player from day one, with the backcourt they already have, with Desmond Claude and Wesley Lake Yates coming over from USC, now Washington could be a team that can go from literally the very bottom to the top tier if things work out.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that the Big Ten is going to be one of those interesting conferences as well. And I know you're tied in with the Horizon League, with Robert Morris being out there as well. And I actually just did my Horizon League conference preview a few days ago, and I did pick Robert Morris number 1 in that league. How do you just take a look at this Horizon League, though? Because that was one of the toughest conferences for me to be able to preview, because you've got a lot of unknowns. You've got a lot of teams that have been ravaged by the portal. And I mean, just my personal opinion, I feel like the Horizon League has been one of the conferences that have been hurt the most by NIL, because they've had so many guys leave the conference and not a lot be able to come in. But it does feel like a big giant hodgepodge out there in the Horizon League, with a team in IU Indy that is going to look completely different than darn near any other team in the country as well.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the portal, affects all the teams. Anytime there's a good player, they're going to be able to go. And plus, the Horizon League loves to go after not only JUCOs, the D2 and D3 transfers, and some of them could have huge impacts. So there's a lot of unknowns in terms of who the newcomers are. But, Oakland still has, the best coach in Greg Campy. That's going to give them an advantage. And we see other teams such as Youngstown and Cleveland State and Milwaukee who can find, good transfer commitments as well. And then RMU, you mentioned, has a completely new roster outside of Ryan Prather with guys from everywhere, but they do have IUND all freshman forward Deshaun Good coming in. They got a lot of depth on this team when you include one of the top 20 rebounders in the country in Nicolaus Chigadias from NCAA, and then a bunch of guards who, from the JUCO and D2 levels, put up a lot of points, and all they needed from one or two of them to break out. And then suddenly the Colonials will be back to being a contender again. But definitely, I wouldn't be surprised if one of 6 or 7 teams from the league who are consistent contenders finds their way to the top spot again.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I do think that the Rising League is going to be a lot of fun to take a look at. The ACC and the Big Ten is going to be providing a lot of headlines as well, and Tristan, I know you're doing an amazing job of getting set for the upcoming season. You, much like myself, cover this great game all 12 months out of the year, and I know you are hard at work to be able to decipher what we're going to be getting from what is going to be a very wild season upcoming. Love to get people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people are able to follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, you can follow me at HoopsNut351 on Twitter/X, and you also follow me at Tristan Freeman on Blue Sky as well. Then we're just, looking at the rosters, looking at the freshmen, and also looking at some of the class of 2026 players who are making moves as well. And before you know it, we'll be having to go through a complete dive of what's going to happen for the 2025-2026 campaign.
Yep, it has been remarkable what we've been seeing here in the season, and my goodness, it is going to be a very, very insane season in general in college basketball. Tristan, he's doing a great job. We'll be able to cover it all. So a big thanks to Tristan for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So, as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast. That is during the regular season and the off season. You guys have been getting quite a few conference previews over the last week or so, and you can expect a lot more of those moving forward as we've got all 31 conferences to do conference previews for. Most likely going to have 1 or 2 next week, so be on the lookout for that, and be on the lookout for another fresh podcast tomorrow as I'm with you guys every single day. North of 2,000 days without a missed podcast, so I'll be back to you once again tomorrow. Thank you.
From emails to reports and project proposals, it's hard to meet the demands of today's competing priorities without some help. Grammarly is the essential AI communication assistant that boosts your productivity at work so you can get more of what you need done faster. Just a few clicks can tailor your tone and writing so you come across exactly as you intend. Get time back to focus on your high-impact work. Download Grammarly for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's grammarly.com/podcast.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.